This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Not only is the NFL Combine great because it gives us a little taste of football, look at the incoming rookie class and stuff like that, but also a lot of juicy rumors start to fly throughout the Combine, talking about where guys may go in free agency, some couple trade partners, and just a lot of good intel when it comes to the NFL. So we wanted to go today, kind of dive into potential wins we could hear at the Combine this year and try to identify what that could mean for the betting markets and more as we get set for this offseason. To do that is Meghan Payton. She'll be joining me for today, breaking down her thoughts on some rumors we could get at this year's Combine. Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on FanDuel Research, FanDuel.com/research, and the Covering the Spread podcast feed. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Meghan Payton. You can find her on FanDuel TV and check her out on X at Meghan Payton 7. Meghan, happy offseason to you. Happy Combine week to you. How you doing today?
I'm good, Jim. Excited to be back on here this week. Obviously looking a little bit different than our traditional regular season playoff picks, but we were just talking off air about this. It feels like there really isn't that like true off season for us because all of a sudden we're already here at Combine. So we're talking draft, free agency, always times up right around Combine. So we're getting set for that. And of course, there's always futures bets. So it's the sport that just keeps on giving. And I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I actually really love this part of the offseason.
Yeah. Me too. I love the lead up to the draft. I love talking about the draft. I love digging into the draft. I can't bet the draft anymore in Illinois, which breaks my heart. Because the state is weird. But anyway, I can go to Indiana if I want to. So maybe not as fun of an offseason as I typically would get, but still a lot of cool storylines. We can talk Matthew Stafford today, Aaron Rodgers, Myles Garrett, a lot of big stuff going to break down at the Combine for this year. So we'll talk to Meghan, kind of pick her brain on her thoughts on Stafford, the Giants rumors that have popped up. We'll talk about where Myles Garrett could go that actually move the needle, where Aaron Rodgers could go that move the needle, and much more to get you set for what should be a fun NFL offseason. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Actually, another show coming up tomorrow here, same place, same time. I'm going to break down my thoughts on the incoming rookie quarterbacks for this year. I have a quarterback prospect model that I run that tells me what to expect of these guys, just looking at their college stats, their college resumes. I'll break down what it says about Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, all those guys. Tyler Shuck apparently I have to discuss, so we'll talk about all those guys tomorrow on Covering the Spread and also on the FanDuel Football Betting YouTube page. So search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating and review. And of course, subscribe on the FanDuel Football Betting YouTube page. Thumbs up there and turn on notifications to get notified as we go live throughout the offseason. March is almost here, and college basketball is reaching its most exciting stretch of the season. Right now, new customers on FanDuel get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on everything from conference clashes to tournament upsets, and even who is cutting down the nets. If you've been waiting to join FanDuel, there is no better time. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you'll get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel and get in on the college hoops action before March takes over. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in D.C. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-79-7777 or visit ccpg.org/Chat, Connecticut. Visit MD Gambling Help Oregon, Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, Meghan, let's begin things here with the broad overview of what we're looking at the Combine. There's going to be a lot of key info that comes out. We're already seeing some reports about Jair Alexander might be getting traded. Jonathan Allen's on the trade block for Washington as well. So a lot of different things could break at this Combine. A lot of different info could come out. What are the key storylines for you this week in Indy?
Well, there's a lot going on because it's not only the combine, which is obviously focusing on the future prospects, but we mentioned that it's tying in with free agency. So we already have the T. Higgins storyline of, what was going to be the biggest free agent on the market. Looks like he will be getting that slap on one more time, second franchise tag. You've got some cryptic tweets from him. Are they going to try to reach a long-term deal? They're acting like it, but he's skeptical. So there's a lot going on with just T. Higgins. But when I bring up him, this kind of is a bit of a domino effect. So him staying with the Bengals then dominoes into these other teams. What are they going to do at the wide receiver position? Because this year you do have a lot of teams that need a wide receiver. One, there's not that depth in the draft this season, and it's really not a great free agency for wide receivers either. So those top guys are going to go quick, and they're also going to be really competitive, which is going to raise the price and potentially, bring the stock up for those wide receivers in the draft. I was talking to a friend earlier this week too, in terms of just combine. It's one of the first years in a while that I feel like we don't really know who number one, number two, number three is going to be, which is fun. It's not as strong of a quarterback class, obviously, this year as it was in the past couple years. But right now, Cam Ward is the favorite at minus 135. You've got Abdul Carter right below. I believe it's at plus 130. Travis Hunter, we're seeing Shedeur Sanders drop off a little bit. I'll ask you this too. I find it a little bit like the one thing I don't like about the combine anymore is we don't get to see the players practice as much, work out, because it's like we're just choosing what makes them look good and not what potentially could make them look bad.
Right, exactly. And it's always kind of it's to the point where I know there's some guys who won't do any workouts, but there are some players who skip a workout and you're like, okay, why are you skipping that one?
Yeah.
Does that just mean you were going to do really poorly at it and stuff like that? But yeah, I agree. When you look at the combine, you used to get guys doing pretty much every workout, and you would see quarterbacks throwing. And this year, no Shedeur Sanders throwing at the combine. Sounds like a lot of other guys will. So it's like it's a lot less intel from actually watching on the field. Now, I think from a reporting perspective, the combine has still been really fun because there will be a lot of key info that comes out, which is part of why Abdul Carter, I think, is shortened. He was plus 150, I believe, or plus 145 earlier this week. Now down to plus 130, there's been some little bit of steam behind him. A lot of mock drafts have Carter going first overall. I think that the reason that Ward was up there initially, and the reason I bet Ward was because before it got banned in Illinois, was because the Titans need a quarterback, obviously. And the Giants are drafting third. They could trade up to first to get a quarterback. But now the Giants linked to Matthew Stafford. And it seems like it's picking up Carter's way. I wish I could hedge and take Carter as well, because I feel like it probably is going to be between those two guys. But yeah, it's kind of like you said, where it's not as impactful as it has been in the past. Like, again, no Sanders throwing. Carter won't work out because of shoulder injury, so we're not going to get as much data. And I love the data part of it as we used to get. So I think that is, from that perspective, it's kind of a bummer for sure.
But you bring up a good point with Abdul Carter shortening, and it makes sense a little bit. However, I'm still going to endorse your Cam Ward bet. I know minus 135, but it's funny because, okay, obviously we're going to get all the draft smoke and things are going to change. But what's not going to change is the Titans need a quarterback. And currently the Titans have the number one overall pick.
Right.
And we've got jobs on the line here for coaches, and we've got, GM's jobs on the line. It's as much as you want to say, take best available, and best available is Abdul Carter. You need a quarterback, and that's the most important position in the NFL. And I do think that we're starting to at least see a little bit of separation between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I don't think it's as much from a talent perspective, but the fear that these GMs and coaches have with what comes along with Sanders. Now, like, we know he's a hard worker. We know that he's tough and obviously comes from Deion Sanders, but what does that entail? The drama, the reality show. Okay. How focused are you just on football? Did you see the clip of Cam Ward and Shedeur earlier?
I did. It was really great. I want the unedited clip though. I want the full thing. I don't want just a snippet. I want the full thing released.
I want the full thing released too. And I thought it was funny that Shadur Sanders, like, I get paid to drink Gatorade, and Cam's like, nah, I get paid to play football. I don't
Right.
know if it says so much about Shadur as it does about Cam Ward, and that
Yeah.
like drafting Cam Ward, you're getting that locker room guy, you're getting a tough player that yes, might have some limitations that we already know and what we've seen in college, but who could potentially elevate the Titans day one, obviously has that college experience. And I think ultimately, as good as Abdul Carter is, if the Titans still have that number one pick come draft time, like they're going with Cam Ward.
Yeah. And I like Cam Ward as a player too, personally. Like if from my numbers like Cam Ward, I like Cam Ward. So I think that he's worthy of that first overall pick. I think I'm higher on him than consensus in general on Cam Ward. So I agree with you that where he should be the favorite right now because how important quarterback is, because I do think he's deserving of that hype too. And there are still a lot of teams that need quarterback. We'll probably get more intel on this as the week goes along too. So I'm pretty excited to track how that goes, but also excited to see what we learn about Matthew Stafford. He, to me, is the big veteran name to keep an eye on here for this next week. He wants a new contract. The Rams are letting him explore contracts with new teams. So, Megan, which teams in your eyes are the best positioned to be like an actual playoff contender? Because if you're trading for Matthew Stafford, you need to have a roster that can be pushing for the playoffs immediately. Which teams do you think could do that if you drop Stafford onto their roster right now?
I like the Steelers for Stafford. Obviously, their quarterback situation a little bit up in the air. You've got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in the building, but are you going to? Russell's going to cost more now because the Broncos won't be paying as much for him, and then you've got Fields at a much cheaper option, but neither really showed that ability. Yet you still have a very good defense. You'd need to get some receivers in. I still think for Pittsburgh to actually make it as a contending team, even with a Stafford. But I think Pittsburgh is a great organization. I think it'd be a good spot for Stafford. A hot take I have for him is Miami. Now, it hasn't been thrown out there much, and which means there's not probably a ton of validity to it, but I think it's interesting because you've got Tua, who clearly we worry about the concussions. We worry about how much he can actually use arm talent, move the ball down the field. This is a run first offense, but you need a good quarterback to actually achieve a run first offense. And I think that it'd be kind of a chaotic move, but at the same time, I don't hate it. I think that there's a place where you bring Stafford in for a year and a division that outside of the Bills is still pretty open. You go in it and you make a little push. But ultimately, if we're talking not just dreams and realistic, I do think that Pittsburgh makes sense. However, like Giants obviously is a name that's getting out there. New York needs a quarterback. And I just worry about, I don't know that I think that the Giants, even with Stafford, are contenders. And so if I'm Stafford, I don't love that option. I'd rather go to a Pittsburgh than I would New York. But those are my initial thoughts on Stafford. I don't think he ends up as a Ram. I will say that.
Yeah, and I like the fit a lot with the Steelers because they had a lot of injuries along the offensive line last year, but even with those injuries, they still played pretty well up front. And once you get those guys healthy again, that's a solid offensive line. And if I'm trading for a 37-year-old Matthew Stafford, given all his very rich injury history, I want a good offensive line in front of him. Pittsburgh, to me, of the realistic options, is that team that has that good offensive line. Frankly, that's why I think they're a good fit for Aaron Rodgers, too, which we'll talk about in a second. But like, if I'm going to put one of those older guys behind an offensive line at quarterback, I need a good offensive line there to support him. And the Steelers have that. So I'm not sure if they'll do this. Philosophically, it seems like they don't want to, and they haven't really done moves like this in the past. But like, I think from a fit perspective, that's my favorite one is the Steelers by a pretty wide margin, frankly.
I completely agree. It does seem like unlike Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
However, I'd say this is the first time we see Tomlin actually have a bit of pressure on his job.
Yeah.
Which is weird when you talk about Mike Tomlin. And so this is kind of that Hail Mary. You'd probably be able to keep maybe Fields in the building. So then you have him, if things kind of erupt with Stafford. But you bring up Rodgers. Rodgers was also one that I had for Pittsburgh as well. These two, I mean, they're similar, but they're different. Like both are older quarterbacks. Both aren't going to be the guys you want for your future. It's essentially a win now. I think most people would agree they'd prefer Stafford than to Aaron Rodgers because of what comes with it with Rodgers. But Devontae Adams has been tied to Pittsburgh. You could get that dynamic duo back with Rodgers coming in for the Steelers. Ultimately, Pittsburgh has to get a quarterback in the building, and I think it should be a veteran quarterback. I do think it should be one of those guys. It's just a matter of can they do it, will they do it, and which one makes sense.
Yeah, I think that frankly both make sense to me, at least.
Yeah.
You think about Mike Tomlin. He's dealt with Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, George Pickens, all these guys who have something going on. Aaron Rodgers has something going on as well. So if anyone can handle Aaron Rodgers, I think it's probably Mike Tomlin, but also frankly Sean McVay. And that's one that's kind of floated out there a bit with Rodgers stuff is, okay, let's say the Rams move on from Stafford. Do they bring in Aaron Rodgers as being kind of this like stopgap guy? And I'm like, okay, I actually do think Sean McVay could kind of handle that smoke from Aaron Rodgers and be well positioned. I do like the Raiders in theory could. I do not want Pete Carroll and Aaron Rodgers' brains in the same room. That's to me sounds like a recipe for like way too many conspiracy theories. So maybe let's keep that one away. But I kind of don't mind the Sean McVay angle to Aaron Rodgers. Did that kind of cross your brain at all as like that being a destination, or is that kind of a weird lateral move for a team if you're moving on from a veteran? Why add another veteran as his replacement?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's a lateral move in the sense, but also you're going to get a better price for Rodgers than you are going to for Stafford and the salary cap and everything. So it does fit better in terms of just price for Rodgers. McVay is a locker room guy, so you could see that. I still worry. Like, I know this is so like, on paper, but I don't like that Rodgers is so much older than McVay. So I wonder, like, listen to McVay, like, no, like you're like 10 years younger than me or whatever it is.
Right.
No. But Tomlin, back to just, I know we're jumping around from Stafford and Rodgers, but Mike Tomlin was with Antonio Brown, as you mentioned, and we didn't know about the drama of Antonio Brown.
We had no idea.
After the fact, and then we're looking at Mike Tomlin like, how did you handle this for so long? So I do think in terms of personalities, characters, Mike Tomlin would be the best fit for a guy like Aaron Rodgers and have at least the best chance at handling a guy like that. When you bring up the Raiders, I don't think that Stafford to the Raiders is a bad idea. Pete Carroll's not taking this job. I would imagine Pete Carroll is not taking this job to go and get a young player or try to completely develop a guy that's unproven. You would imagine his eyes are on Stafford. Now, does Stafford want to go to the Raiders in the AFC West with the Chiefs and the Chargers and the Broncos? I don't think so. But Pete Carroll's definitely going to have his eyes on the veterans. I wouldn't imagine he'd want to be with Rodgers. I don't think that'd be a great fit, like you said. But those are the teams that stand out. I think it's Raiders. I do think Rams isn't a bad call, especially at it being a cheaper price for a veteran quarterback. And then, of course, Pittsburgh. And really, you could make a case for Rodgers and Stafford for either of those. And then my Miami long shot.
Right. I love it. I love a wild card thrown in the mix as well. And like, if we're talking about like just team chaos, want some chaos in the NFL season, that would get the job done for sure. Tossing a grenade in there with that for sure. Now with the Raiders, I do think that like the general idea of them getting a veteran, whether it be Stafford or Rodgers, is fun. Because if they can like get that veteran, tell them, hey, we might take a quarterback at 6'2", and as long as they're aware of that, I think that's a pretty fun idea, given that they could bring in that rookie, let them sit behind Rodgers or Stafford for a year or so and kind of work it that way. I do think that would be interesting from like a philosophical perspective. I just think some terrible things could occur to the world if Pete Carroll and Aaron Rodgers are together for too long. That to me sounds catastrophic. Let's talk about the defensive side of things, Megan, because Myles Garrett is the biggest name here. He's requested a trade. The Browns have said at every single chance, no, we are not going to grant him a trade right now. But are there any teams you think could take the next step if they were to add a pass rusher of Myles Garrett's caliber to their roster?
I mean, I just think it's hard because I don't think that the Browns really want to trade him because of the value that he brings and the fact that the Browns is already a disaster organization as it is. They're trying to recover from the Deshaun Watson trade. What are they going to do with that number 2 overall pick? Are they going to go get a quarterback? Are they going to go and get Abdul Carter? Maybe in that case, that would be the one way I see Myles Garrett potentially getting traded is if they make the decision to go and get a star defensive player with that number 2 overall pick. What about a team like Tampa? And I bring up Tampa because I do think that the NFC South is an interesting division to look at. The Bucs can contend. And clearly Tampa was upset about the way things happened with head coach situation. And yet they want to go and take that step forward this year. They're a team that I could see making a pretty big offer for a guy like Garrett if they could get the offer right. And then, you can go and get an Abdul Carter with number 2. That's an option. However, I ultimately think this is one of those storylines that the Browns hear a trade. They look the other way. They're not thinking about it. They're going to end up with Myles Garrett in Cleveland.
It's a bummer because you mentioned Myles Garrett going to the Browns or the Buccaneers, and my eyes lit up because
Can you imagine? Maybe that's because we love the Bucs and we want their success.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't think that's a non-zero factor here because we're both very pro Bucs here, as we've discussed throughout the year. But they've got a solid quarterback. I still think that the offensive infrastructure around Baker Mayfield, despite Liam Cohen leaving, is still pretty good, especially if they do bring back Chris Godwin, which I kind of hope they do. But even if they don't, I mean, they played well without Godwin last year. Baker's efficiency without Godwin was still really, really impressive. So even if Godwin does leave, that's still a good enough offense to put up points and move the football. The defense was disappointing last year, which is surprising because Todd Bowles' track record as a defensive head coach is so rich and so good. It's if you add in someone like Myles Garrett, that's a ceiling lifter. And there aren't a lot of teams that I think have the ability to reach their ceiling by getting a player like that. But I think the Bucs are one of them where they've got the building blocks to be a high upside team. But then once you add in Garrett, that's that extra sauce on top that could increase the odds they get to that ceiling.
And you'd imagine at some point you're taking the phone calls, right?
Yeah.
As much as the Browns can say no, 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 Myles Garrett's one of the best players in the NFL. There's going to be teams that want him. The age is a concern. Clearly, this isn't a guy you necessarily bring into a young roster,
right?
But those teams that are in that, top 10 contending teams that are just one weapon away from really making a push to, a deep playoff run, a Super Bowl. Those are the teams that can offer more, that should offer more. But ultimately, Cleveland's such a wild card, and we've seen it just they do their own thing.
Right.
Even they're a team. I'm not to completely dog on Cleveland, but they're a team that could get the best offer in the world for Myles Garrett and yet still close the door just because they don't want to listen.
Right. And they, to me, are fascinating because I have no idea what they're going to do. When you're picking second overall, your starting quarterback retore his Achilles and, everything else that comes with Deshaun Watson. They have no upside backup option. And yet still every mock draft you read has them taking a non-quarterback. It's and now Kirk Cousins might stay in Atlanta. It's what's the plan here, guys? Not really sure what's going on. I just don't get why they're not linked to more quarterbacks in the draft. Yes, they don't have the infrastructure to win right now. So you don't want to drop a quarterback into a bad infrastructure, but it's not the worst infrastructure. It's just, they had such bad quarterback play that everything else looked bad, but they've got good pass catchers. The offensive line when healthy is okay enough. And I think there are pieces there. So I guess I'm just confused why they haven't been linked to more quarterbacks yet.
I completely agree. Then you've got Travis. So Travis Hunter, I feel is who keeps getting linked to Cleveland, and great, of course, but who's he? What's he going to be doing in that? And that's
can he play quarterback too? Is that a hidden talent when you get to they had to do or they didn't have to do it? So is he secretly also a quarterback?
Honestly, what's the plot twist here? At some point, when you're in those, pretty rough situations like Cleveland is, you can't necessarily go for best available. You have to go for position. And so I found it interesting as well that they haven't been linked as much to the quarterback position unless they're going to make a big move in free agency, which who's going to help them get out of that mess?
Would not be me. I can tell you that they deserve to sit in their muck for a little bit as punishment for what they have done. Okay, Megan, let's take a look at the futures market over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Primarily just Super Bowl odds up right now, some player futures as well. But when you look at the futures market as of right now, are there any bets you want to grab to kind of get ahead of things and before some things may shift throughout the offseason?
There's of course futures bets that we're looking at, and I'll give you one in each tab. So we'll start in the Super Bowl market. I love taking the Bills at, I believe it's at plus 760 the last time I looked. This is an insanely good price for a team that I could say maybe is like one wide receiver away from what could have been one wide receiver one away from making the Super Bowl last year. Like, they made the AFC Championship with just Khalil Shakir, essentially. Like, that was it. They did not have another receiver. Obviously, Josh Allen is the man of many traits, but they took a different approach last year. It worked for the most part. This was a team that this time last year, the headlines surrounding Buffalo were rebuild, start from scratch, just because Diggs is leaving. And we've seen that that's not necessarily the case. Even when they went and got Amari Cooper, and obviously he got injured, that didn't really pan out fantastic. That even with him not panning out fantastic, they go and make the AFC Championship and really were great all year long. You've got the MVP and Josh Allen. And so it'll be interesting to see how they approach free agency, how they approach the draft. But I think Buffalo is definitely in a place to win now, not a sign of a rebuild. So I took them at plus 760, and I did jump into the MVP market as well.
Okay, so we're taking the Bills plus 750 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. You mentioned MVP. Of course, Josh Allen, defending champ, plus 550. Lamar Jackson, already a two-time winner. He's plus 450. What stands out to you in the MVP market?
So a couple of different storylines here. Makes sense that Lamar and Josh Allen are essentially almost co-favorites at this point. I think Burrow's at a really good price, and especially with it looking like Higgins is going to be out there playing, I think that there's a good chance we see another surgence from this offense, whether the defense lives up to, just takes a step up or not. I can't make any promises there. But my favorite, more, I guess you could say, long shot bet is Jaden Daniels. I think we're getting a really good number on the offensive rookie of the year. Can he go from elevating himself from offensive rookie of the year to MVP? Commanders are in a really good situation, as this is what I always say, narrative award. Typically, your team has to be doing really well in order to even be considered for this award. And being in the NFC East, outside of course, the Eagles, they're in a good situation to compete. I think we're seeing, some key playmakers around really start to rise up. And just a second year under this offense, I think Jaden Daniels could easily take another rise. So I like a ticket on him for a bit of a long shot.
Yeah, 9-1 right now at FanDuel Sports for Daniels. I also will say Patrick Mahomes did catch my eye at 8-1. I might have to do it. He's going to have Rashee Rice next year, assuming he's not suspended for most of the year. Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce's back. They'll figure out left tackle. So it got my attention. I know people are groaning and cringing. I'm sorry, but it got my attention is what I will say. Any other futures catching your eye, Megan?
Just in the draft, I mean, we kind of touched on it at the beginning of the show, but I do like at Cam Ward at minus 135. If the longer we wait, the more draft smoke comes out, and these numbers can change a lot just because you hear one rumor and then boom, now it's minus 400 for Cam Ward or Carter. But I kind of think this minus 135 is the sweet spot. I wouldn't be surprised if the odds got a little bit better, but I'm not really willing to risk that. So I like a price on it at minus 135, because if we start getting a little bit more news that, Titans want to hold on to that number one pick, They obviously need a quarterback. Cam Ward starts separating himself even more than from Shedeur Sanders, then that number is going to get a lot worse. So I like betting on him at minus 135, but I wouldn't talk anyone off a hedge of Carter at plus 150 as well, and kind of, say one or the other. It's really just fading Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders in that case as a number 1 overall pick.
I do agree with the overall thought that it's probably down to those two guys. I think that's probably where it'll settle in between Carter and Ward, just because if they don't go with the quarterback, they're probably going to go with the best overall player. And that is, I think Travis Hunter has a case to be made there, but it does seem like everything that the reporting has said has been that it's Abdul Carter. So I think it is not quite a 2-horse race, but it's very, very close. So I agree that Cam Ward, pretty fun there. We'll talk more about him on tomorrow's show as well. But that is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Little combine preview to wet your whistle, which should be a very newsy combine, I think, for this year. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'm going to break down my thoughts on the quarterback class for this year. We'll talk more Cam Ward. We'll talk some Shedeur Sanders. Other guys I got my eye on for this class as well. That'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel Football Betting YouTube page. So go there, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave us a thumbs up. And also check out the Covering the Spread podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Megan, appreciate the time as always. Enjoy the combine. Enjoy some hopefully time off and time to decompress a bit. It's been a chaotic couple of weeks, but looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Jim. Excited to talk a little football. I think this is one of the most sleeper weeks of the offseason. So hopefully we can get some fun storylines and be back here soon.
I am looking forward to that for sure. You can find Megan on X at Meghan Payton 7. Check out her work on FanDuel TV as well. I am on X at JimSannes, also on Blue Sky at JimSannes. You can find FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Big thank you to our YouTube producer, Justin Lane, for his work on the video side of things. Thank you, Justin, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you if you decide to bet the combine when those props do go up over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I saw some up early this week already, so if you want to bet that, check that out over there depending on your state. We'll talk to you all once again soon. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.